Over the past several days, I've been seeing news coming out of Liberty University. It has caught headlines because Liberty is both a Christian-based university, but also because the administration has prominent members who have been ardent supporters of Donald Trump. It's an uncomfortable topic for me to tackle as my first attempt on commentary. I didn't create this channel just to drag people online. That's not what I'm here for. That's not what I'm about. So I'm not going to name names with the crisis that's going on Liberty. It's on Fox News, and you can go look it up for yourself, that an administration member of the university seems to have their family caught up in what appears to be multiple fronts of sexual misbehavior outside of the context of marriage. There's allegations of extortion, and it's frankly an ugly mess. I have friends who've gone to Liberty. I've considered taking classes there myself in the past. I think I even know people that have donated money to them. It seems like a decent school. Who knows what the facts are here, and I'm not getting into details. It's trashy. When families melt down, I don't think it's cool to just kind of dogpile on them. But from a dad's perspective, what do we do when those around us, especially those in leadership, have a moral failing? What do we do when people who should be the ones standing up for values and family are the exact opposite of a crisis and kind of appear to be hypocrites? This stuff does not happen in a vacuum. When affairs happen, it impacts far more than 2 or 3 or 5 people. I was very familiar with a church that was a very large church where something along the lines of this occurred. The senior pastor ended up running off with a secretary, go figure, and within several months, maybe a year after that, another pastor, associate pastor, ran off with an additional church secretary. Tons of people in the congregation just, they voted with their feet and they left. And I saw marriage after marriage fall apart in this congregation around it. It was like a hand grenade, just kind of ripping through. And sadly, there was a number of more affairs, too, that happened with prominent members or people you thought were strong in their faith, just kind of fell away, and it was an awful snowball effect. And do you know how long it took that congregation to get itself back on its feet? A good 20 years, There was long-standing consequences. The damage of an affair just doesn't stop there, though. It's, within the context of a family, there's generational damage. More than to this married couple. It impacts the kids. It impacts the kids' marriage later on in life. Or if they're adults, it might impact their adult marriage that they have going on. The grandchildren may still be facing consequences. Might not be apparent, but in how people relate to each other, how they relate to relationships, their parents, siblings. There's a lot of ties there. It's ugly. There's a lot of people today that have no use for the Bible. Have you read it? It's very relevant. It may be 3,000 years old, in some cases older, but the human heart, it hasn't changed a bit. We're not more evolved. The vast majority of the people in the Bible are these horribly broken people, and story after story is just so many examples of what you don't want to do. The story of David comes to mind. You probably heard of him, David and Goliath. Powerful king. Didn't start that way, but he became very powerful. God's anointed. He has this thing for one of his officers' wives. Her name was Bathsheba. David was supposed to be off fighting in war. Instead, he stayed home, and he was walking the walls, and he saw his officer's wife bathing on her rooftop, and it kicked off his desire for this woman. He ended up having an affair, ended up getting her pregnant. Because she was pregnant, he couldn't pass it off. Tried to pass it off as the officer's kid, but it wasn't going to work out. So he ended up ordering the officer to take one of the positions in the front lines in battle, and kind of had him bumped off by his enemy. This had far-reaching implications for David. The officer, his name was Uriah the Hittite. He was part of the elite guard in David's army. And Uriah had married another really key officer's daughter, Bathsheba. So the father-in-law, Uriah is dead, but the father-in-law is still a prominent, powerful officer, and his dad was one of David's main advisors. So it was a real mess. Overall, the story arc, David marries the woman, and it causes strife within his kingdom. He's called out for it by a prophet. He's sinned against God, and he has to kind of go and seek God's forgiveness. But there's still consequences. Later in life, David's kids end up being a mess. And it kind of leads back to this decision he made with cheating with Bathsheba. And you can kind of follow the trend line out. His kids end up in a civil war. One of his sons kills another son. One of his sons sleeps with David's other wives, and he's kind of egged on by it by the grandfather of Bathsheba. It's a whole big mess. And you can almost trace everything that happens in Israel and the eventual collapse of Israel right back to David's early sins with having an affair. I think anyone going through these kinds of ordeals in their family, they need a lot of prayer. It's very serious stuff. I don't want to sell that short. Marriage is the bedrock of society. As marriage falls apart, society falls apart. Don't take it lightly. Our divorce rate in this country says everything about us. If this is how we treat each other, the closest person in our life, why would we expect anyone else to be treated better? Pretty much every problem we have in our country, you can trace back to how healthy the families are. According to the American Psychological Association, 40 to 50% of married couples in the U.S. end up divorcing. Nearly 15% of married women and 25% of married men end up having affairs in their marriage, according to the New York Times. I'll link those in the information at the bottom. Don't do this to your families. Don't do it to your spouse. Don't do it to your kids, your grandkids, everybody around you in your family that kind of leans on your marriage, looks to you as an example. It sets a horrible trend. Go to marriage counseling. Get help. The Bible says in Proverbs that you should drink water from your own well. That means you should be at home where you belong. Your feet shouldn't be taking you places where you shouldn't go. Listen, people are horrible. We do horrible things to each other. Character these days is a huge exception. It's not the rule. When affairs happen, it should shock us. We know it's wrong, and there is zero legitimate excuses to do it. When these type of nightmares unfold in a family, the first thing we have to do is recognize the damage that's been done and the long-term ramifications for everybody around them. They need prayer. The next thing I advise is to be humble. You don't know when these type of bombs are going to go off in your own family. You know, like, it's really easy to judge other people and then just karma come back and bite you in the butt. You know, and couples going through this are going to have to figure out how to deal with the long-term consequences of this. Marriage and families can survive, but it takes a major heart change. It may be hard to accept, but there are many legitimate circumstances where divorce is not the best option, and a list of options that are hard and difficult, and there's no other way to get around. I have a lot of compassion and sympathy for families going through this. It's a sad epitaph in our culture that in our current presidential race, 3 out of the 4 candidates on the ballot have allegations of some type of extramarital activity. If anything, it's symptomatic of decay in the character of our nation, and it should sadden all of us. Men are particularly vulnerable and suffer addictions to online adult content that distorts the intimacy of marriage at pandemic level proportions. There are many studies outlining the negative impacts of viewing this type of content on the brain. Get it out of your house, get it out of your marriage. I've screwed up a lot in my life, but I'm very happy that I can say that years ago I got rid of this garbage. Marriage in our nation is in desperate need of champions to hold up the banner for so many broken families. If your marriage needs help, don't be afraid to seek professional help. It's not a mark of failure. Everybody needs a tune-up. If you've been married a while, you know, you don't have to go it alone. You can have these old rut arguments, and you know, professional counseling is going to help you navigate some of that stuff. Don't be afraid of it. Just do it. So if you believe in marriage, don't forget to smash the like button below and consider hitting the subscribe button as we tackle current events and tough issues like this. Nobody wants to hear what Dad has to say till they need a dose of common sense. So if you like my insights, feel free to support me by sharing this with your family and friends. Really appreciate it as I try to get this channel moving. Thank you for watching.